How's it going, everybody? Today, I just kind of wanted to take a look at the Chiefs' free agency, take a look at their signings, take a look at who they lost, and kind of come to a decision about how we feel about the Chiefs' free agency as a whole. I want to start out by saying that I'm going to look at the draft separately from this. So these moves are going to be made kind of in a vacuum and just talking about how they embetter the team right now and where the team is at. And after the draft is done, I'll go ahead and make another one of these videos talking about putting the pieces together and kind of seeing where the team is at then. Let's go ahead and start with the Chiefs' losses in free agency. And what better place to start than with Trent McDuffie, who they traded to the Rams. They got a first-round pick, a fifth-round pick, and a sixth-round pick in this year's draft. And then they got a 2027 third-round pick for Trent McDuffie, who chose to the Rams and signs a 4-year, $124 million deal. Over the last couple years, how the Chiefs have used Trent McDuffie in their defense is they've been putting him on the outside and trying to match him up with number one receivers. And like we saw in the Cowboys game last year, where McDuffie constantly got bullied by Pickens, gave up multiple pass interference calls. He's just not the best guy out there. Probably has something to do with his height, but he really excels in the slot. And the truth is, if you're the Chiefs, you don't really want to pay Trent McDuffie the top of market money he got when he reset the corner market to be just a slot corner, right? You really need him to be that top level guy on the outside, and he's just simply not that. So taking him and getting more value out of him and trading him, getting the cap space, does it hurt that McDuffie's gone? Absolutely. He was a great player. But at the end of the day, you weren't going to get a deal done between the Chiefs and him at the price that he and his representation were asking for. So I think the McDuffie move, just by itself, not talking about the other losses that are coming up, is fine. But besides that, once you look at it from the rest of the moves, you might ask yourself, okay, well, why didn't we keep McDuffie or try to keep some of these other guys from the secondary? But maybe the Chiefs are planning on picking up some of those guys in the draft. They did make one move, but we'll get to that later. Next up, the Jaylen Watson has left the Chiefs, and he also went to the Rams, signing a 3-year, $51 million deal with them to play alongside Trent McDuffie. Jaylen Watson was a great CB2 here in Kansas City. I do think that there was a lot of hope but when you decided to not sign McDuffie, that you would sign someone like Jaylen Watson to a deal here and keep some part of that secondary around, so you're not in the situation you're in now, which is that secondary has a massive question in it, and you're not sure who you're going to get, and if you don't nail those draft picks, what kind of spot are you going to be in? But I think just given the market that Jaylen Watson was looking for, the amount of money he got, I just don't think, again, given the Chiefs' cap situation and their other needs, that they were going to commit to paying Watson the money that he got with the Rams. And, you know, another thing that comes to me specifically when I think about that secondary, right? And I know a lot of it has to do with the pass rush. And that's, you know, how tired as a Chiefs fan are you of watching teams successfully complete 3rd and 16, 3rd and 17, 3rd and 18. It just seems like no matter what, the Chiefs defense could not stop 3rd and long. As I'm sitting there watching the games last year, I would rather the other team have like a 3rd and 3 or like a 3rd and 4 versus a 3rd and long, because there's no way the pass rush is going to get home. And it doesn't matter if you have, you know, the Texans secondary back there, one of the best in the league. They're not going to stop that unless you got guys getting home. So it's definitely a year where, through the free agency decisions they're making, the Chiefs are trying to shift to bettering that pass rush, even if that secondary takes a big step back, because the two play complementary of each other. You need a great pass rush to make a great secondary. You need a great secondary to make a great pass rush. You know, the two are together. You got to be able to get home. You got to be able to cover the guys. Next up, Brian Cook has signed with the Bengals. 3-year, $40.25 million deal. And of all the losses, I would say that one is probably the second most impactful. Brian Cook was a dog back in the secondary. fairly good in coverage, great tackler, which is something that some safeties just are not quite as good at. We'll get back to that in a minute. But again, safety is one of those positions that when you look at it from the draft, generally you could draft it. Generally, safeties don't get as much money. As we compare later on, we'll compare who the Chiefs signed versus what Brian Cook got in his deal. But ultimately, this just comes back to the Chiefs didn't really have the cap space to keep Brian Cook. And it's just another loss in that secondary, and Brian Cook was the person in that secondary who was calling plays to the DBs and, making sure the DBs were doing their job in coverage. So that's something that the Chiefs will have to replace. And I fully trust Spags in his defensive team to figure that out and make those decisions. And then the last really big one that we need to talk about is Leo Chenal. So Leo Chenal has signed with the Commanders with a 3-year, $24.75 million deal. And this is one that, for us Chiefs fans, we're very conflicted on. We all love Leo. I will never forget that blocked field goal against the Broncos.
The hold, wants the kick to win it. Oh, blocked!
But he did get a lot of money. And in the situation you're in, the Chiefs have already paid Nick Bolton the money that he got last year. And you're still paying Drue Tranquill. Now, I suppose the Chiefs could have moved on from Drue Tranquill, but this linebacker class is very deep in the draft, and we'll see if the Chiefs, who they draft and what they get. But you just can't afford, in the Chiefs' current cap situation, to pay 3 linebackers high-end money. Probably could have moved on from Tranquill and somehow made this work, but then I don't think you are able to sign the players that you did get if you do that. So, again, it's a matter of what ifs. Leo is a dog. He will be missed, and I wish him the best of luck with the Commanders. Now that the big ones are out of the way, the Chiefs did release Mike Danna to save cap earlier. I believe this was before free agency started. I could be wrong on that, but Danna, just like a lot of that interior line and a lot of that defensive line in general, you'll find that they just, besides Chris Jones, they didn't do anything. It felt like teams could just simply double up Chris and then they didn't have to worry about anyone else because no one else was going to get home. Whether we're talking about Charles Omenihu or left, Derek Nottie, Mike Pennell, Mike Danna, all those guys, they're either getting older or they're not playing very well. And when you entered this offseason, if you're the Chiefs, you really needed to take a step back at those guys. And you needed to ask yourself, can we raise the floor in free agency of this D-line? Because this D-line was atrocious. I don't know if statistically it was the worst, but as a fan watching teams pass on the Chiefs, like if the Chiefs didn't have the elite secondary that they did, Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Brian Cook, all the guys they had back there, right? You would have, we were already only a 6-win team. And I guarantee you we would have been significantly less without such a good secondary covering the guys, because that D-line was not great besides Chris Jones. So, yeah, Mike Danna, Derek Nottie, Mike Pennell, all left in free agency. I haven't really checked up on where they've all signed to yet. And then the other big release is Jawaan Taylor. So that was another move to save some cap space for the Chiefs. And when you look at Jawaan Taylor, it's a mixed camp. On one hand, I think Andy Reid is correct when he assesses Jawaan Taylor as an above average tackle when he's not committing penalties. But the problem is Jawaan Taylor is the most penalized tackle in the league. And even just a simple false start penalty from the position he lines up at is enough to kill a drive if you are the Chiefs. And as with an offense that already has struggled the last couple years to move the football, to have sustained drives, we can't afford those penalties from Jawaan Taylor, whether it's the holding or the false start. So I think it's the right decision to move on. You've got 4 of your offensive guys locked down for the long term. You got Josh Simmons, Kingsley, Creed, Trey, and then you brought in Jalen Moore last year on a starter salary contract to play one of your tackles. And when he wasn't injured last year, he played fine. So I think, and I see people, talking about like, mocking a tackle in the first round of the Chiefs. The Chiefs have no business drafting a tackle in the first round. Because if you can't get by with one, probably average or just slightly above average tackle play on your line with having the other guys being great starter level guys, then you probably need more than just a tackle. You probably need some other things going on. I think that as long as those 5 guys are playing next year and they don't get through the injuries like we had with the tackles last year, I think that you will see a much improved line that will be dominant in most cases. So, it was the right decision to let Jawaan Taylor go. I wish him the best of luck. But those penalties were killing us all the time. And to the best of my knowledge, that wraps up the major free agent losses. I mean, there's some other ones like Isaiah Pacheco moving on and some other ones, but they weren't really impactful in the same way that the previous ones we just talked about were. Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Brian Cook, Leo Chanel. Let's go ahead and shift gears and talk about the Chiefs free agent signings. So I'm going to start off with the big one, the one that everyone's the most excited about. Kenneth Walker signing a 3-year, $43.5 million deal, 28.7 guaranteed, and worth up to 45 with incentives. We did need a running back, and that was very evident, right? When the Chiefs did run, they were very inefficient at it. I mean, I think we only had like 100-yard game. I don't remember who it was against, but it was, Kareem Hunt when he had like the 30 carries. Great short yardage guy. I wouldn't even be against him coming back next year and being that short yardage guy, kind of like a fullback. But the truth is he's kind of past his prime. He's getting up there in age. And I just don't think you can rely on Kareem Hunt to be your RB1 like he was, for a lot of 2024 and then all of 2025. And then you have Isaiah Pacheco who, before his injury and after his injury, he's 2 different runners. He lost the burst that he had, and I think that's really highlighted the vision problems he has when it comes to seeing the holes and hitting them. And then you have Brashard Smith. And Brashard Smith, when drafted, always kind of struck me as like a gadget guy. Someone who isn't ever going to be your RB1, who you're going to be okay with giving, 20, 30 carries to a game. He's someone who maybe you bring in for certain packages or like third down stuff, right? And that kind of makes maybe more sense with Kenneth Walker being on the Chiefs now, because Kenneth Walker is, he can catch the ball, but he's not really a pass protection guy. He's more of a downhill runner under center. He got a lot of carries that way. And this is where my thoughts starts to form about Kenneth Walker. I think it is a great move. I was very shocked that the Chiefs actually managed to get him at the price he's at. I figured that, given the bidding war over him, Super Bowl MVP, peak of his value, he might have been able to get even a few more $1 million in that deal. I'm very happy he didn't. But this is a really risky move. And it comes from the scheme that the Chiefs have ran over the last 3 years. Now, you could argue with me that it maybe, the running backs they've had have really limited that scheme and, not allowed them to run like this. But, only 20% of all of the Chiefs' plays were under center snaps in general, 29th in the league. And 85 of those were run plays, which was 27th in the league. And, whether those are play action or not, right? The truth is you don't really want Kenneth Walker is very unproven running out of shotgun. And we have run a lot out of shotgun with those RPOs, ran a lot of them to like Kareem Hunt or Isaiah Pacheco. And I spent all of last year freaking out about them really only getting 1 or 2 yards per run on those plays. So, if Kenneth Walker can prove there's a couple options here. The first one is if Kenneth Walker can prove that he can really run out of shotgun in those situations and the scheme doesn't change to favor his strength, then I think this will be a really great signing, right? Because you get a super good back, really good forced missed tackles, lots of long run plays, which is something the Chiefs have desperately needed so that we don't have to rely on Mahomes nearly as much, coming off the ACL. But the other option is the scheme change, right? Maybe, Andy and Eric Bieniemy, together kind of step back and they realize that, the scheme that we've been running here doesn't work. And I'm not saying they're going to completely change everything. I highly doubt that, but maybe shift that 20% of under center closer to 40, right? Go like a 60-40 team, right? That's, a very standard percentage for under center versus shotgun in the modern NFL. And if you do that, I think you'll see Kenneth Walker be very close to his form with the Seahawks, the 1,000-yard rusher, especially not splitting carries in the same way, because over there he was splitting carries with Zach Charbonnet. Here, he is the main back. We did pick up another guy, but in my opinion, he strikes me as like the third down back since Kenneth Walker isn't the greatest in pass protection. But if the Chiefs want to run the ball, they're going to give it to Kenneth Walker, right? You didn't pay him the money not to do that. So only time will tell. And I think by the end of this season, or maybe even just halfway through this season, we'll really know how to feel about the Kenneth Walker signing based on how the Chiefs have used him and what their snap percentages have been. Kind of moving on from that. Let's move on to Travis Kelce. So 1 year, $12 million deal worth up to 15, and he is back. Travis Kelce is a very decisive one, I feel like, in the last couple years. I mean, he's getting older. I believe he's 36, will be 37 by the end of the season. I'd have to check that. But, he's getting older, and he's not the guy of the future anymore. And every year you bring him back, you've got to ask yourself, is it worth another ride given the Chiefs? He definitely wasn't worth the $20 million they paid him this year. I think that would have been a gross misallocation. A $12 million deal with up to 15 is better, but what's worth considering is I know that they're two different positions, but if you compare Travis Kelce's receiving stats last year, 76 receptions, 851 yards for 5 TDs, right? And you compare that to someone like Michael Pittman Jr., who just got traded for and got a 3-year, $59 million contract, so, closer to that like $20 million range. Last year he had 80 catches for 784 yards and 7 TDs. I get that it's, two different positions and they're used in two different ways, but in terms of receiving value, right, in terms of what a receiver can provide your team, you're not going to find a guy with Kelce's skill set for $12 million. And with all of the other positions that have opened up needs, when you're looking to this draft, yes, you have extra draft picks, but do you want to be spending them on a tight end now, or would you rather keep Kelce, who is a leader in the room, a leader on the offense, right, with Mahomes, and, potentially you get a tight end in a future class or sign a different guy in the future, right? I think that, to those fans who are out there who watched Kelce cost us a couple of games with his drops that lead to picks, those were very unfortunate situations. But the truth is, even if you remove those last year, right, the Chiefs are still an 8-win team. They're not going to the playoffs at 8 wins. And, he's playing at an elite level still, a Pro Bowl level, right? I don't think he's nowhere near the best tight end anymore. His best days are behind him. But, with Mahomes coming off the ACL, keeping some familiarity, especially given how uncertain the wide receiver room is, and that will end up probably being a question for the draft. You needed a guy that Mahomes can throw to and that he is familiar with, right? And overall, as much as I am in general on the team Kelce should have retired, coming back, given the situation, it's a good move for the Chiefs. And really, let's be honest, it was the only move to make. Moving on here, Chiefs signed safety Alohi, I hope I'm saying that right, Alohi Gilman from the Ravens, 3-year, $42.75 million deal with $15 million guaranteed. When I saw this move, I just immediately thought it was the Brian Cook replacement. You let Brian Cook walk because of the money he got and the level of player he is, and you sign someone who, in all senses is not as good as Brian Cook. I think Brian Cook is a better safety, but at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves this question about free agency. Besides, Kenneth Walker, which was the big move, does signing this player raise the floor of my room, and does it limit me from spending a draft pick in that position, right? And I think Gilman does that, right? I think over Chamari Connor or Jaden Hicks in the safety slot, I think he statistically has played better than them, and ultimately it was a good position at a more reasonable price than what keeping Brian Cook would have cost you. Even if Brian Cook was willing to come back on a reduced salary to play for the Chiefs, which we don't know he was willing to. I know that Leo was willing to, but not Brian Cook. You needed something in the safety room, especially given, the missing pieces now in that secondary, and getting a top of market corner would have been far too much for the Chiefs cap situation. So this was really the only move. A move like this is the only move you could make. And we're just going to hope that Gilman, plays at a good enough level to be comparable to Brian Cook. But overall, good signing. Next up, Khyiris Tonga, D-tackle, former Patriot, 3-year, $21 million deal, $14 million guaranteed. And this is where I really got to ask myself that same question I asked before. Does this raise the floor? But instead, obviously, we're talking about the D-line. Does this raise the floor? Tonga historically has been a good run stopper. He's a really big guy, but doesn't provide you a lot for the pass rush. But even if you look at his pass rushing numbers from like last year, right, playing with the Patriots, he does a better job than Derek Nottie or Mike Pennell, which, is a big thing when you're asking yourself, does this raise the floor, right? I still think with a move like this, you're still very much in the market for more D-line. I think at pick 9, or even 29, but 9 is where the best tackles will be, or DNs, whichever one. You really need a DN. You could even potentially use another D tackle and keep Tonga as kind of a depth piece there, or a rotational guy in that lineup. But, you still need to draft a guy at 9. But Tonga itself raises the floor of that room better than Nottie or Pennell. So already we as Chiefs fans should be happy that the floor of that room has gone up. And, as the floor of that room goes up, what you're going to see is Chris Jones' performance, even at his, he's getting older, right? I think he's 32 now. I think he'll be 33 by the end of the year. I'd have to check that. But, when guys around them have help, like Karlaftis and Jones, they will play better. When you raise the floor of that line, you're going to create situations where somebody's getting home, and that's what the line has needed. So good signing there. Next up, Kader Kohu, cornerback, former Dolphin. I couldn't really find the trade details on that besides it being a 1-year deal, so I'm going to assume it's a vet min deal. If I'm wrong, I'm sure you'd hear about it in the next couple days. But I like to consider this another low-risk move on a guy with a high potential, which is a Veach classic. Very injury-prone guy. I hope that stays away from him, because with the way the secondary is now here in Kansas City, he probably could find some decent snap time. Played lots of slot corner, but very versatile. Hoping that having a guy like him, if he's able to consistently play, he can keep Chamari Connor out of the slot, because Chamari Connor in the slot when McDuffie was here was a nightmare. Like, teams would find Chamari Connor and throw to the guy he was covering. But hopefully, this deal works out. And like I said, it's a low risk, high upside. So if it works out, it's going to be great. You're going to get a starting cornerback on a vet min deal. But injuries have played. I believe he's only played like 30 something games in the last 4 years. So, that's not very many games. Hopefully, he stays off the injury report and is playing the game. Waiting to see how that one goes. Next up, Tyquan Thornton is brought back on a 2-year, $11 million deal worth up to $14 million. And I know that people across Chiefs Kingdom were wondering, are they going to bring back Thornton? What are they going to do? I think this was probably the biggest no-brainer after bringing back Kelce. When Thornton in the early part of the season was getting snaps because of the Xavier Worthy injury, he was balling out. I would say, if you had to talk about which wideout played the best last year, given the situation across all of them, it's Thornton. I don't think Rice really got better like we expected. I think the Worthy injury was limiting him, and maybe he's not developing as they thought, right? And just those other guys that are in that room were so situational. But Thornton was the guy that made big plays when big plays needed made, right? I mean, that catch against the Giants is something that really sticks with me still, and probably one of the main reasons we won that game in general. But now, signed him to money. They paid him. Please increase his use, Andy. He needs to be on more often. He's your deep threat guy, Maybe that allows Worthy to run more slants and shorter routes, use his speed on the short scale instead of always trying to blow the top off the defense. Let Thornton do that. He proved he's better at it. In my opinion, this was a no-brainer, but glad to have him back. And then the last move that we have to talk about, and I believe this happened yesterday, is Amari Demercado. I really hope I'm saying these names right. Running back to a 1-year deal, and this is another low-risk move on a guy with a really high upside. And given that they signed a running back, this kind of puts the Chiefs in an interesting situation concerning Kareem Hunt, because you just signed Kenneth Walker to that massive deal. He's your RB1. You have Rashard Smith still on his rookie contract. He's kind of like your gadget running back guy for certain passing packages and whatnot. And now you have Amari, who is now here. And, he didn't really have a ton of snaps in Arizona when he played. And, potentially a third down back. I mean, his pass blocking, from what I've seen, looked pretty good. But, I'm just kind of wondering, what is his role in this offense? And, what is Kareem Hunt's role in this offense now, right? Will Kareem Hunt get another deal? We don't know. What is Amari's role? We don't know. What I'm hoping is we don't get another Elijah Mitchell situation out of this, where, let's just say, for example, the Chiefs decide to bring back Kareem Hunt for his usage on those, 3rd and 1s or 4th and 1s, right? He was very good at them. And you have Amari, who dresses out and takes up a roster spot all year and gets paid, even if it's just a vet-min deal this time, but he doesn't ever play. And maybe you had him there as a depth piece in case Walker gets hurt or Rashard Smith gets hurt or something like that. But again, it just seems like, a guy like that is probably better off not being signed in the first place. So I'm not really sure how to feel about this one. I think once the season gets rolling and we see how he is used in the system, it will really tell to me what we're looking for his usage. But that is about it as of now. Obviously, there could be more moves coming. I plan on making another video after the draft. And in that, I will also recount the free agents that have been signed since then. But given that everyone is new here, welcome. I just want to talk a little bit about myself. So in this upcoming season, I plan on trying to make a video talking about each game each week and the Chiefs' kind of keys to winning those games every week. We'll see how that goes, but I will be 100% live streaming play-by-plays of all the games this year. So if you want to come and hang out with me and listen to me commentate the games for you and interact, I'd be happy to have you. I will be here for every game except potentially the Seahawks game because I might actually be going to that one. But with that, have a good day, everyone. And as always, go Kansas City.